Oconee County Planning Commission this Monday, October 1st, 2018 at 6 p.m. Our first order of business is invocation by our county chaplain.
Yes, sir. Pray with me if you'd like. Father, I just want to turn this meeting over to you, that we would operate in your love that is patient and kind, that's not envious or does not boast, not arrogant or rude, and that we wouldn't insist on our own way or be irritable or resentful, but that we would bear things, believe things, hope things, look for the good of our neighbor, and by your wisdom that we would do good for this county. In your name I pray, amen.
I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, sir. Okay. Our next item is approval of minutes. Do I hear a motion?
Make a motion they be approved as submitted.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Any corrections or any discussion about the minutes? If not, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Let's see, we don't have anyone for the non-agenda public comment, so we'll skip right on down to the staff update. Mr. Chapman?
Certainly. If we could wrap that into the comprehensive plan, because the only thing I've been looking at is comprehensive plan stuff for the last couple of weeks, so I don't actually have anything officially as a staff update.
Okay, we'll move into item number 7, 2020 comprehensive plan.
All right, I have stuff for this. So we've been working on, Bill and I and Jerry have been working on setting up some focus group meetings for the week of the 22nd, 23rd, and 24th of October, the end of this month. And we've scheduled, as of last meeting, a Tuesday night, the October 23rd meeting of the Planning Commission to have a workshop, a roundtable workshop with the consultants. They'll be here. During that day, they'll be working with different focus groups. Also, if anybody would like to meet with them individually, I sent out that email. I got a couple replies. Just let me know. I'll set up a time for you. It will all be a public meeting, just like this. However, there will be, the consultants will be addressing you all first for the first probably 30 minutes to an hour. And then after that, it'll be a communal workshop with whatever public is here. And we'll kind of have a kickoff kind of thing. So that'll be occurring. If anybody here has any ideas for focus groups to look at, I've talked to Mr. Johnson and Mr. Kisker about realtors and builders. I've talked to Mr. Pearson about veterans. If anybody else has any other focus groups they'd like for me to get in touch with, please just shoot me an email or just let me know. I'm going to take them on a tour of the county, two-hour tours, one south, one north, to try to hit all the highlights from Seneca, Townville, Fairplay, Mountain Rest, the different industrial sites, then the north part, a couple parks, Salem, Mountain Rest, Long Creek, sorry. So if anybody has any thoughts, ideas of areas I should show people, please, once again, let me know. And we are, as of right now, we're making some maps, and they're getting all the population and housing data put together. So those are things that you all will have to approve. There aren't necessarily things that we have to work on here, because it's raw data. It's, the population is what it is. So you all will have to approve that, but we probably won't have a lot of face time with it. Whereas like the housing element itself, the future of it, we will look at in different portions of that. So right now it's the uncontestable data that's being worked upon at the moment. And that's what I have.
Okay. Does anyone have any comments or anything they'd like to say? Okay, let's move on to item number 8, discussion on I-85 overlay in specific regards to the Fairplay Village and Fairplay Village Center subdistrict. We don't have anyone to speak on that, so open the floor for discussion.
So if I can give everyone a brief background on this, is that in 2012, the Residents Fair Play got together and they said they wanted to have certain kind of zoning in their area. And over the course of apparently a year or more of meetings, they enacted their I-85 overlay, which is broken into 3 sub-districts and a further sub-district. Specifically, we're looking at the Fair Play Village sub-district and the Fair Play Village Center sub-district. And through, if we look at things over and over and over again, sometimes we just kind of skip over the things that we think are fine. It turned out that something kind of reads there there's some issues with the entire thing, I think personally, but something that's come to light is how businesses are treated. And right now it says if you're gonna go in the overlay, the I-85 overlay, Fair Play overlay, you will follow Appendix A. Now Appendix A is attached down there. It's 18 pages of design standards, which in my mind make it probably the most strict zoning area of the county is Fair Play, which I wouldn't have guessed personally. So that exists today as it is. Now, if businesses want to go in, regardless of whether it's a Dollar Tree or a wood shop, they have to follow a set of strict standards, and that perhaps is okay. But from talking to the people who wrote this language and the people who are involved with the process, it wasn't the intent for that. So the 2 small adjustments that were made are highlighted on the 4th page there, and simply say, as opposed to having to follow Appendix A and then go to the Board of Zoning Appeals, who may or may not like it, who may want to change stuff, it says, just like in the Lake Overlay District, you have to go to the Board of Zoning Appeals, and they can put some standards on there if they feel that it's necessary, and it gives the public an opportunity to have buy-in, which is what the intent was of this. So the 2 small changes, there's 2 sentences there, change it from shalls to shoulds kind of thing. So that's the background and the edits therein.
Okay.
Do you need them? I'm okay with it.
Mr. Chairman, if I could, just extra procedural posture. This has had first reading by full council, so it's to you all for your report by statute. So it can be something as simple as we're in agreement with the proposed changes or disagree with them, or you get to add additional thoughts. So that's what we kind of need from this as a short report.
So we don't need a motion or anything of that nature, just basically
Yeah, you would need a motion. I think Ms. McPhail was starting off with that she agreed with them. So a motion to say you agree with the proposed changes, and then you could have a second and then discuss that and see where it goes.
Is our industrial site down there involved in this?
no.
It is part of the I-85 overlay. It's called the Cleveland Creek Subdistrict, but it's not affected by these standards at all. It doesn't actually have any standards on it other than the covenants and restrictions that are on the industrial park already. So it wouldn't be affected by any change in language that we do won't affect the industrial park.
Attachment A is the way it reads now, and attachment B is.
Attachment A is the clean version. Attachment B is, it shows you where the edits are. I took it, this is how council saw it, so I wanted you to see it the same way they saw it. So attachment A and attachment B are identical, just attachment B shows you the change in language. Literally highlights the change in language. So it's the same way council sees it.
And are we agreeing with attachment A or attachment B?
They're the one and the same. Council sees a clean version, like how it's gonna look inside of the ordinance, and B is any edits.
Where you made the changes?
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right.
So it's on that, yeah.
I second it.
Which means that I did make a motion.
Didn't you?
I didn't quite, but that's good, I did.
I thought
So-
Mr. Root made it
Yes,
for
sir.
you.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Now, all we need to do is you're just gonna send this back and say, we agree with the changes.
I'll write a letter and I'll have you sign it as a formality for it, and then they'll go to them.
Okay, so if we don't have any further discussion, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, let's move on to item number 9. Can we skip this one altogether? No.
9, is it 9? I thought it was 3. No, it's
Nope, yeah, number 9.
Yeah, that's 9, you're right.
Okay, this discussion on protection of agricultural lands. We have several to speak tonight. Ms. Gray?
Good evening. Thank you for this opportunity to speak. My name is Sandra Gray, and I'm a member of the Oconee County Agricultural Advisory Commission and a small farmer growing medicinal herbs organically. Oconee County has high-quality agricultural and land surrounding our urban areas. We understand that practices commonly associated with agricultural production on this land are often incompatible with urban residential settings. Buffers or setbacks are defined as physical separations between land parcels using vegetation, berms, water, or simply a distance of physical separation. One of the best buffers for ag use is horizontal distance, just separation between the conflicting land uses. If there is an established farm and a new development occurs next to the farm land, then I believe there should be a buffer between the two parcels of land, and primarily on the side of the new development. Having the buffer zone on the new development would help to maintain the integrity of the existing farmland. So why do we need buffers? Urbanization and other land use conversion may result in conflicts between agricultural landowners and adjacent non-ag users. A buffer zone would benefit both types of land uses. It protects valuable farm land from the potential conflicts of development, such as restrictions on farm activities, theft, vandalism, loss of profits. Buffers benefit also, though, the non-agricultural landowner from potential aggravation of farm activities so close to their home, including noise, odors, animal containment, smoke, and visual impacts. So it goes both ways. I would like to address the impact of urban development adjacent to agricultural land, which is being managed under the guidelines of organic production. In our county, we have 2 certified organic farms and a much larger number of small farms that practice what is called chemical-free production, which employs many of the organic practices. Buffers are already required by USDA organic regulations. The regulation reads, and I'm quoting, "Any field or farm parcel from which harvested crops are intended to be sold, labeled, or represented as organic must have distinct, defined boundaries and buffer zones." Buffer zones for organic producers are usually established on the organic farmer side of the property, and the size and the type of buffer is not specified in the regs, but determined by the use of the adjacent property. Currently, most of the adjacent property is usually unmanaged land, so the required buffer zone is relatively minimal. However, when a new development occurs next to the established ag land with the potential of creating contamination, then the buffer zone must be rethought and increased in size to prevent problems on the organic land. So should this burden be passed to the farmer to protect his land by creating a larger buffer zone on his own established farmland? Or should non-organic agricultural land users, the developer or home builder, do their part and also provide a buffer on their own property as well? With a uniform buffer requirement on any land next to ag land, whether the land is managed organically or not, protection of both land users is provided by the buffer zone. So to repeat the old adage found in Robert Frost's poem, Mending Wall, "Good fences make good neighbors," I would add, good buffers make good neighbors, especially when there are cows and chemicals involved. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Drake?
Thank you for allowing me this opportunity. I drove about 2.5 hours, which shows you how passionate I am about this. And I echo everything that Dr. Gray said. This is an issue that is a tremendous issue throughout this country. There are, not just in Oconee County, but every county of the state, we have the encroachment of subdivisions and other commercial and residential development on family farms that have been in place for, in some cases, hundreds of years. And I do a lot of work with the EPA in Washington, D.C., formulating pesticide labels and changing wording on labels. And there are setbacks imposed on labels for farmers where they cannot spray within a certain buffer zone of residential development. What this does is it takes acreage out of production. So if you have a large farm and you have a large subdivision or some other entity that moves in next to that farmer loses many, many acres of productive land because of this, because they have to impose buffers on their side, which to me is completely out. It's not right. It's something that should be addressed. A lot of these developers are coming in, they're opportunistic. They build these developments in such a way that it really does impede the farming practices without any consideration of what the farmer has given his life to build. So I am very much a proponent of imposing legal or regulatory buffer zones and setbacks on these developments that are adjacent to currently used agricultural lands in order to prevent this burden on the farmers. Another thing that it does is, like Dr. Gray mentioned with organic farms, you quite often have these subdivisions and they expect their lawns to be completely free of weeds, their shrubs to be completely free of any kind of an insect. So if they move these subdivisions or commercial development next to an organically producing area, what you have is you have the possibility of drift from that subdivision onto these organic areas. And even in a conventional agriculture situation, you have the possibility of drift of herbicides, things like dicamba that may be used against weeds into a farm situation and severely damaging crops like soybean and a lot of, especially the tomato crops and the truck crops. So there's a huge risk in both ways. To both the farmer and the person that might be living in the subdivision. So I did a good bit of research over the years. I've brought some articles for you all to read, and I'll give these to the chairman. But what my suggestion would be for you all to consider is perhaps imposing a minimum of 100-foot buffer zone between any new development and existing farmland that's being farmed, with some sort of a green tree and mixed conifer and hardwood green buffer. Because what this does, it serves as a windbreak, and it also serves as a catch for any herbicides that may be moving in either direction or insecticides that may be moving in either direction. The buffer zones that are suggested for schools and nursing homes and daycare centers are much larger, and you could even implement something in your regulations if you decide to do this to increase these buffer zones around schools and other facilities that are imposed on the new development. Of course, as you know, this regulation if put in place can be changed at any time. It can be altered at any time by county council. So this is not something that would be permanent. But I think if you all did put something like this in place, you would be an example in South Carolina to which other counties would look as an example of what has been put in place and what works. Because this is something that hasn't been done widely in South Carolina because of the pressure of large-scale developers not to do this. They don't want this to happen, so there will probably be a fight there. But I think to preserve agriculture in Oconee County for future generations, this really needs to be done. So I respectfully submit these documents, and you can look through these. This has a lot of data on the widths of buffer zones, the types of plantings, how effective they may be.
Do me a favor, give them to Mr. Chapman, and he can,
I'll get you copies, thanks, sir. Could you, Dr. Ray, could you identify yourself just for the record?
What?
You didn't identify yourself at the beginning.
I'm Tim Drake. I'm the Assistant Director of the Clemson Regulatory Division, and I'm also State Entomologist for South Carolina.
thank you, sir. Mr. Donald? Tim?
I thank you for allowing me to speak. I heard what the two previous speakers said, and I agree with all of that, but I want to take it a step farther. 100 feet, that's a bare minimum for me. I know that I think dicamba use is 150 feet, if I'm not mistaken. But I'm Tim Donald, by the way. I'm from the southern part of the county, where I have a poultry operation and commercial beef. Poultry being the biggest sector of Oconee County agriculture, let's talk about that. Poultry producers fall under regulatory setbacks imposed by DHEC. A commercial poultry house has to be 400 feet from a neighbor's property line and 1,000 feet from a residence in order to obtain a permit to build or a permit to operate. And an encroachment is squeezing out our existing farms. That's where all this is coming from. If a farmer goes in, he establishes his setbacks, he gets 1,000 feet from the nearest residence, he gets 400 feet from all the property lines, gets his permit to operate, and he's thinking, well, if Junior comes back to the farm in 10 years, I'm gonna set aside this back place back here. I'm 400 feet off of that property line for maybe Junior can build him some poultry houses in the future. Well, if in the meantime, somebody builds a house upon that property line, well, that farmer's setbacks just changed. No longer a 400-foot setback. He's got to meet a 1,000-foot setback. Now, some may ask, well, why don't you go ahead and plan for that? Well, if you try to plan for that, you got to include that in your engineering. You got to include that in your permitting process initially, when you may never do it. And that means thousands of dollars that you're going to have to pay out up front. So encroachment sometimes, perhaps unintentionally, it is squeezing out our farms. I also serve on the executive committee of the South Carolina Farm Bureau Federation. I'm vice president for the Piedmont District. My responsibility is to oversee 13 counties in the Piedmont District. And the Piedmont District is probably more susceptible to these setbacks than the rest of the state, just because our farms in Piedmont are smaller on average in acreage than most of the state. So what we're doing at Farm Bureau is we're going to encourage legislation that would require any development adjacent to an existing farm that has to abide by DHEC setbacks for that new development to have to abide by the same setback regulations as the farm. In other words, if a subdivision wants to come and build adjacent to a poultry farm, then they should have to set back 400 feet from the property line, or 1,000 feet, if they're building a house, 1,000 feet from the poultry barns. That's not asking for special treatment, that's just fair treatment. And that would stop encroachment from changing the existing farm's setback regulations and stop affecting the future of that farm. I think it's all the farmers' dreams to have their children to come back to the farm and carry on the farm. But current regulation is squeezing out our farms, and a lot of times they can't expand. And just like with any other business, if you can't expand and build new, eventually you're going to be out of business. So I don't know if you're aware of how it works. I don't know if you're aware of the poultry bill we got signed into law this year. It did originate right here in Oconee County. So I would love, since Oconee County is probably the most affected, especially with the poultry business being as big as it is here, to take the lead on this. I think it's setting great precedent. We just went through our policy development meetings. We have 4 districts in the state. I introduced this at a Piedmont District policy development meeting. Then as the Central District had their meetings, and the Coastal District and the PD, it all gained traction. So all of them started calling me back and said, we love what you've introduced as setbacks, and we're going to support it. So what we will do is Oconee County has sent a resolution to the state. We will meet in Myrtle Beach on December 1st. We will take it before 300 state delegates, and if approved, we will start legislation to try to get some kind of law passed to protect us. But before that happens, Oconee County could support this thing and take the lead on it. Our goal is just to stop encroachment from affecting the future of our farms. And with that, any questions I could answer for you, I'd be glad to do so. Again, we're just asking that any future development adjacent to a farm that has setback requirements have to meet those same setback requirements as the farm.
I got one question.
Sure.
I mean, I agree with you on the thing, but what can that land be used for? say you got the 1,000-foot setback, what can you use that 1,000 foot of land?
We can graze it, we can mow it, but we can't use, our poultry litter within 400 feet of the property line, just like, we have to set back from the poultry. We can't use the manure there, even though we have to take CAM training to be certified in manure management, and we have to have recertification hours. So we're continuously taking classes, we're continuously being inspected. It's not like we're just free reign out there. They inspect us, our paperwork has to be up to date, we have to have soil samples to prove that we're doing what we're supposed to be doing. And so they manage us pretty well.
That's what I was trying to get you to say.
All right,
Thank you.
appreciate it. This is Debbie. Yes, ma'am.
Well, they kind of left me with not a whole lot to say. They're going to say about the same thing I was going to say. I'll take it in a little bit of a different direction, and I appreciate you, Tim, coming. I was thinking about what Tim said. I think that when people like poultry farmers, swine farmers are under DHEC regulations, that we should look at mirroring those regulations for new development, our new residential areas. And this whole thing is about neighbors. And I know that developers look at farmland and some of the beautiful undeveloped land we have in the county as potential for development. But there are people there who are making their living next door, and what we don't want to do is for them to have to move their operation that they put so much money in. I have a young lady that's in my district. She's actually a swine farmer, and they are as regulated, if not more regulated, as the poultry farmers. They're regulated by DHEC. Tim can tell you, as far as pesticides go, you're regulated by the state and the federal government as to where and how much you spray or what you spray. And really, for the most part, and especially in an animal facility, you're at risk from your neighbor as much as they are from you, if not more. Because a lot of times homeowners and municipalities or whatever don't take as much care as using pesticides as the farmer has to. Because most of them have to be registered, licensed operators before they can use pesticides on their farms. But this also, we also are, as part of the Ag Advisory Board, we talk about forestry too. And I think I drive by, I work in Cashers now, and I drive through the forest every day, and my thought is, what if some developer comes up here and starts cutting all these trees down? And if y'all know me very well, that's one of my things. I don't like people cut trees down. So, I think we need to think about buffer areas in everything we do. Oconee County has been, for the last few years, the county has been concentrating on industries besides agriculture, bringing into the county, which is a good thing, and tourism. Both those things are great, but you've got to plan ahead. I live next to a big tourist attraction, Lake Jocassee. It's become a fairground, and it's sad to look out every day when I go to work and see fairground-looking tape and parking and everything else. And I would love to see a buffer area where they've planted sunflowers or trees or something, so I don't have to see the fairground. So I think the same thing, we need to look at our agriculture area, our forest area, and our ecotourism, and make sure that we plan ahead and have buffers between residents and these areas. And if somebody new moves in, they need to do what other people have to do that are next door. So, like I said, they pretty much covered everything I was going to say. So,
Ms. Sewell, could you identify?
sorry,
Identify yourself.
I'm Debbie Sewell, Ag Advisory Board.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Ms. Sewell. Does anyone else like to speak before we go into discussion? Okay,
In case that wasn't clear.
it's on the floor for discussion, so
Has there been any discussion about what size development we're talking about when we're talking about this buffer? I mean, is this somebody who has split off a piece of property for their child, or is this something where somebody is trying to build 15 homes or 20 homes or 50 homes?
If I may, the genesis of this was the Agriculture Advisory Board had a farmer and rancher listening session 4 months ago or so, and it came up, that idea kind of came up during that process. Ag Board talked about it, then the Agriculture Advisory Board went to Planning and Economic Development. That's Mr. Davis, Mr. Kane, Mr. Hart, and they voted to send it to us. So basically, it's an idea. There's not a number. Some numbers were just fielded right there. As far as there's nothing out there. This is a blank slate. So I guess the first hurdle that you all really have to kind of hash out is that the outline of it, what you all think is most tenable, most doable for us to kind of move forward. But this is ground up. That's why I specifically didn't bring you anything.
It does seem like this is ground zero, and the precedence here is definitely not on the side of the farmer. We would be starting something new. And I'm sure the poultry and swine farmers are always getting knocked around. Believe they're the ones who are always having to bend at this point in time. That being said, we're always having to provide a balance here of personal property rights. And so that's why I say, are we talking about the person who may also have a 50-acre farm, and they've now just subdivided that farm down into 3 parcels for their kids, and now do their kids have to come in and follow some new buffer setback? Or are we talking about a developer who comes in with 50 home sites and does something of that nature?
So,
to me, those are 2 very big different things.
and we would have to be able to identify that. And so a couple meetings ago, I think I brought up something to the idea that developers can just kind of one at a time it, as far as like subdividing pieces go. So if that's an approach we'd like to take in regards to that, we would probably end up looking at some of our subdivision regulations as well to make sure that people can kind of walk around some of our regulations. That's also a possibility, certainly.
And does the buffer, is that the best way to provide protection? Or do we do something within our zoning to say, we were here, we have the right to do this as farmers. Understand that before you come in, because that zoning is something that's public knowledge. It's not like some conservancy or something like that, which somebody would have to research a deed for. But if we just simply put protections into our zoning that say, hey, we're here, we are zoned agriculture, whatever that might mean to us, as a form of protection. And if you build right up next to me, understand that you've built right up next to me, and I've already told you that I was agriculture.
I think there's some concern there with, as Mr. Donald presented, the fact that simply saying I'm agriculture in the zone districts, and if you look real closely here, the 0.495% are actually zoned agriculture. So if you address only that zoned land, granted that is still what we're talking about, but you're not really doing a whole lot of good when you're talking about a farm that is there and somebody comes in and builds, and we say, okay, you're ag. DHEC still says, now you've got to increase your setbacks. They say that to the farmer. They don't say that to the developer. They say that to the farmer. So is it fair because someone wants to build a new house there, that the farmer then loses the use of his land?
I think this is where the misconception of zoning comes in. I hear so many times, don't zone me, don't zone me, don't zone me. But zoning is a protection mechanism. It's not an overlay mechanism to where you've penalized somebody. I've always seen zoning as I have this protection using these guidelines because I have now zoned.
But even
self-zoning.
within the ag zone, if I'm correct, even if, say we are zoned agriculture, and we wanted to build new chicken houses. But at the same time, the manager behind us has now put a house back there. Those chicken houses, even though we're zoned agricultural land, will change the setbacks for us, regardless of what zone we're in. So at that point, we've waved the flag, we've done the thing. We're clearly agriculture. Anybody who has any doubt about that doesn't know us very well. But when somebody builds a house on adjacent property, it changes what we can do with our property.
And is that a state rule that causes
That's a
that, or
DHEC
is that
rule.
a?
That's a DHEC rule.
That's a DHEC rule.
That addresses only the farmers. What the farmers, I believe, are asking us to do is come back in and say, the farmers, if you want to say it, the farmers' rights are being infringed upon by state regulations. So let's do something to protect them that puts at least part of the burden on the other use lands, not just agriculture. Because right now, they're constantly chipping away at the use of agriculture lands instead of ensuring that other lands contribute to the protection of agriculture lands.
So I'm gonna just, I love the farms, and I am a future farmer as well. That being said, do we infringe on the personal property rights, not of the developer guy, but of the person who has 50 acres out there and they want to give a few acres to their child, and now all of a sudden they're going, okay, if I subdivide this off to my 3 grandkids, they now have to adhere to a 1,000-foot setback. I can't give them enough acreage to make that setback for them to even put up a house to live in, let alone do anything with.
Okay, Mr. Donald, if you can address that. He's done a lot of research on this,
Sure.
I think.
And just trying to get a better understanding of how do we
Yes,
separate out?
There is an out. Now, our definition is any development. You asked the question, who? Any development. Because any farmer with a CAFO is acronyms for Confined Animal Feeding Operation. Any CAFO has to abide by those setbacks. I'm zoned ag, but if I go build more, I gotta meet those setback requirements. But if I have a neighbor to come in and build up on the property line, now I've got a 1,000-foot setback to obtain rather than a 400-foot setback to obtain. See, that's our thing. Encroachment is changing our setbacks, which is squeezing us, and eventually gonna squeeze us out. And like I said, I understand why people wanna move out in the rural areas. It's the most beautiful place in the world to live. I don't blame them at all. But why should that affect the future of our farms, which are dwindling? But there is a way out. If you're speaking of a grandfather leaving his children or his grandchildren some property, there's a waiver. There's also a waiver in place for the farmer. If I can't reach my setbacks, I can go to my neighbor and say, hey, I can't get 1,000 foot from your house, but I'm 900 feet or I'm 800 feet. Would you sign this waiver? And they can sign a waiver, and that's the way out if you can't meet those setbacks. But you got to have 2 willing parties. And of course, a grandfather with their children, of course, he would sign a waiver, but I don't understand exactly where that would come in unless he's already got a CAFO. I don't know where his buffer would come in.
I think also, Mike, that we're probably talking about something where you own property and you would like to deed it to your children. The chances of you putting poultry houses where you are is not a concern. So I don't think you would ever reach into that 1,000-foot setback as far as somebody is concerned. I think you're for something where you would hit the 1,000-foot
It would have to be
parameter.
a CAFO.
You would be talking about something much larger than what you would be concerned with on a small farm. But on the small farms, then they still deserve protection from the guy who comes in, and there's an elderly lady who's now in a nursing home, and her daughter who lives in New Jersey oversees the estate, and those 1,000 acres are sold, and this guy has a 50-acre farm that is organically certified, and they move in, then all of a sudden, all of their ability to do things is expanded, is pushed back again in order to maintain their organic certification. Why not put part of that burden on that guy who bought that 1,000 acres and is gonna put houses there, and say, why don't you contribute? If he's got to now set back 400 feet, why can't you at least set back 100 feet or 200 feet? And let the farmer absorb part of it and the developer absorb part of it. Instead of putting, all I think that the farmers are asking, and I'm with them, if y'all know that, I'm on here to do that. I think the farmers are simply asking to receive the same protections that other people have, and that is not to always bear the burden of regulations that cut their business.
I think that we definitely need to, if I'm understanding this correctly, you've got a parcel of land, the farm has a future development area that they might want to do on that farm, but because somebody has come in and built too close, it prevents them from that future area of use from being able to utilize that.
That's one
The guy who's coming in to build that house, if he knows that it's ag and knows what that is, okay, so he signs a waiver when he does something that says, hey, I'm going to build this house here. I don't care what y'all are doing over on the other side of the tree line there. That's fine with me. And maybe it is some way that we put in something that has a waiver position to it. What I don't want to do is, or the way I see it just from a lawsuit standpoint is, okay, I just built me a house. This is great. I understand there's a farm over there. I don't care that there's a farm over there. And I've set back according to what we have planned as far as some setback. And we've put an ordinance in place, and I met that ordinance, and I built my house. And now all of a sudden something happens. Either it rains and all this manure comes flooding over, or it sprays one day and all of a sudden all my stuff is killed or something. And I turn around and I say, I'm going to sue the farmer because of something big just happened. And I'm going to go to court and I'm going to say, Judge, I met all the setback requirements that the county said, and the burden was on me to do that even though it shouldn't have been. I met all those burden setbacks. Now what's he going to do?
But they will have already met setbacks as well. And so then I guess it'll be up to the judge, but the farmer will have met all of his setback requirements.
But as far as the property rights, my property rights have been infringed, and I said, well, I can't use all of my property, and I just want to build a house. I can't use all of my property because that farm was already there, and I understand that, and I didn't use all my property. But now the property that I did have that I didn't use has now been infringed on by the farmer.
Welcome to our world.
Yes.
And that's what I'm trying to get at is going, okay, we've put the farmer in even a more precarious position because we've now told the new guy to do something so that the farmer can stay where he is. The new guy does that, it puts the burden back on the farmer again. And I think if we could come up with something that simply said, you're signing a waiver in the first place, knowing that there's a farm over there and knowing that they can do all these things, you've put it out there, it's now in the deed that you understand that if you build up next to here, you're building with that understanding, almost like building in a floodplain.
But you still haven't changed how the farmer, by building that close, you still haven't changed the fact that the farmer now can't do things on more of his land. He already couldn't do things on it to begin with. Now that you've built there, he can. There's more restriction on because now his setbacks have moved.
And unfortunately, that's a DHEC state situation that I would fight in line to help change.
Yes, sir. I'm sorry, Frankie, if you want to.
And I'm just talking out loud here. And
Up at the pedals, please, sir. State your name.
Tim Drake. All DHEC regulations are based on federal statute, so they are enforcing laws of the EPA with regard to water and air. So that's not something that can be changed at the state level in most cases. And there are strict safeguards in place, legal safeguards, regulatory safeguards, that prevent farmers from doing anything inappropriate with pesticides, wastewater, and other things that might come off that farm. So in the scenario you described, if you did have a pesticide contamination, if you had wastewater to flow out of an animal facility and go onto someone's property, and it was determined through an investigation, and that's what our division do, we investigate things like that, that was at the fault of the farmer, well, then the farmer would be penalized by the state, and that other property owner would have every right to sue that farmer for damages. What these buffer zones do is they reduce the likelihood of that happening. In other words, if you have a minor pesticide drift, if you're spraying and all of a sudden wind kicks up some pesticides and takes it into this buffer zone, it's not as likely to take it into the yard of someone in a subdivision and give their azaleas a bad look. If you have something that might occur with a hog waste impoundment or with chicken waste, it would not as likely move into this subdivision or into this populated area and cause problems. And with regard to law, and as you mentioned, someone subdividing a farm among several children, basically pesticide law, and I'm not sure about animal law because I'm not into the DHEC end of things, but pesticide law dictates that applications that are being made with certain setbacks or buffer zones between that application and a residence. It doesn't delineate whether it's a subdivision of 100 homes or one home. It's just the property line of that next adjoining property. It has to be a certain distance from a certain residence. So in other words, when you said a farmer gave land to 3 children and they built houses, that farmer would still have to abide by the same setbacks with those 3 houses as they would with 150 houses. So those buffer zones would be just as important if you did this as if you had 100 houses to move in, because the law does not make any differentiation, and labels do not make any differentiation between 3 houses or 150 houses.
And explain one more time about the 400 foot that you already have to do and the 1,000 feet from a house.
Okay, now that's with animal regulations. Pesticides, the reason I suggested a minimum of 100 feet is that most of your pesticide application regulations on the labels, most of those application buffer zones are within 100 feet. When you deal with animal regulations, it's a whole different game. And so you may want to look into differences between conventional agriculture or field crop agriculture and animal agriculture when you're setting, if you decide to set some of these buffer zones. Because I know those buffer zones are larger because of odor and other things as well.
You mentioned that the farmer could be penalized if there was an overspray or a runoff or something like that. Does the farmer buffer themselves to prevent that suit to begin with?
They do. Farmers nowadays, well, for one thing, farmers don't use any more pesticides than they have to. They're so expensive. So they put prescriptive applications out. They try to reduce boom height. They do everything they can to reduce drift, because if they drift on someone else's property, my division is going to be out investigating and they're liable to get a fine. There are accidental situations. You can be out there spraying, you can go out and there's a temperature inversion, you go out and there's a wind that kicks up, and these buffer zones are simply there to protect situations like that. And also to allow that farmer to spray to the edge of his property and not have to take 150 feet his entire property line out of production in order to meet that buffer zone requirement.
Okay, we got the same situation on the average landowner though. No, we don't want to take 150 foot of property from the farmer or the whatever it may, but we still don't want to take 150 feet from the average person. Just take, for instance, where I'm at, there's chicken houses right behind me. No big deal. The guy came right before he bought the property. He came around and asked everybody, or told everybody that's what he was going to do, and asked their opinion or if they had any problems with it. But that still doesn't say he's growing whatever, some kind of vegetables. Then he's got that setback he's got to have. I agree the next land should have the same setback. I mean, that protects both sides, but just because I live next to a
farm, I've got 150 feet or what it be, I can't do anything with. I mean, I know the farmer may not be able to do nothing with his, but on the other hand, I can't do anything with mine. So I'm paying tax on 150 foot that may equal to 10 acres. And I know some of the chicken houses land, it may add up to 100 acres, but still, we're taking land from people and they're still paying tax on it. They still had to buy it. And that is not right. Now, if I moved into a situation, or anybody else, where there's chicken houses already there, or there's cattle farm already there, and this developer wants to come in and put condos or whatever he wants to do, then it should be his responsibility and his alone to put up something to safeguard his development.
Right.
Whether it be a 30-foot buffer, 100-foot buffer, 1,000-foot buffer, whatever it may be that he deems, and I know that's not gonna happen a lot of times, but, they're the ones, the new development. But what do we do about, our county the majority of it is control-free. There's agricultural land that goes right in beside control-free land. So we can't have control-free land if we're gonna have buffers. We already got setbacks, so it's not technically control-free anyway, but now we're gonna come in and add buffers on that?
Well, I think what I understood the proposal to be, and correct me if I'm wrong, y'all, was for any new development that moved in to have these buffer zones imposed on them. And that would go for farms as well. If you moved a new farm into an area, you would have to have that buffer zone imposed on you as well. So the way I saw this was any new development would have these. In other words, if you already own property and a chicken farm moves in next to you, it would not impose a buffer zone on your side, but it's any new development. And if a developer comes into this county or any other county with these zoning ordinances and knows that from the get-go, that they're going to have to, the entire border of a farm, they're going to have to set back 150, 250 feet, they build those green spaces in. And we've seen in the northeastern states where they've done some of this, that actually becomes an asset to that subdivision. These green spaces are greatly favored by people who move there. And so it's really not a hindrance to the subdivision to put in a green space or a buffer zone with trees in a park-like setting.
Okay, now, I'm just gonna give you a personal experience from just this weekend. I went to a memorial service at Clemson for a young man who passed away, and he lived in Washington, D.C. So you can just imagine the urban, where his life was. And so the majority of the people who came to that memorial were from up there. And it was amazing to me. Most of them were young people, young couples with children. And so we're all standing over there by the bench, doing the memorial service thing, and you look up, and where every one of those kids, some of them had stripped off their clothes, but every single one of them were rolling up and down the hill of Memorial Garden there at Clemson University on the grass. They were having a blast. My guess would be that was some of the only grass those kids had ever seen, except for the postage stamp in their front yard that's manicured and sprayed and taken care of by somebody that they don't even know. And as a teacher, I know that one of the things that I worked with the county on was the fact that many of our children no longer have green spaces to play in. And they see this as a tremendous detriment to society as a whole. When I wanted to be by myself and needed to think things through as a child, I went out and made dams in the runoff from Daddy's garden and, imagined little elves and unicorns all over the place. Modern kids, they go get on a video game. So they're not outside. And green spaces would add that if the developers can see that setback as an opportunity to provide playgrounds and green space and opportunities for children to be children again. What we need to do is stop looking at things as ways to punish. The farmers are not asking to take rights away from people. The farmers are simply asking for the county to take a step that would help protect their land. I'm not sure about, Ms. Gray, you know a lot more about organics, but I also know one of the things, when I watch television sometimes early in the mornings, one of the commercials that just gives me nightmares is the one that talks about mosquitoes, and the little dude is over there, and his van's parked behind him, and he's got his arm in what looks like a blower, because somebody might not want mosquitoes living under their azalea leaves. And I think to myself, what on earth would that do to an organic farmer next door? It would destroy their farm. And all the farmers are asking is that Oconee County, they're not, I mean, Farm Bureau is asking for the same setbacks as DHEC is asking. I don't know where that'll go. It suits me, but I know it's not gonna suit developers. I think that it would be reasonable, though, to ask Oconee County to look at taking a small step at doing the same thing for the farmer that the farmers have been doing for people for generations. We have made moves to protect the people. We have abided by regulations and done what we were asked to do to protect the people. Now, perhaps it's time for the people to step up and say, you know, we'll help keep the farmers in business if this will help protect their land and their livelihoods as well.
I've been quiet for most of the night. And I'm not disagreeing. I don't have in this battle. 0.5% of the parcels are zoned for agricultural. Sounds like a small percentage, but then you flip to the next page, and it's almost 17% of the land. So we are talking about a significant portion of the land in Oconee County. Even though it's a small number of parcels, those parcels must be relatively large and conjoined to other pieces of property. And I'm not saying, we do have a lot of things up here. We just fixed one of our unintended consequences. So, I think it'd be nice for next meeting, to have the overlay or have the zoning map, what's agricultural, what's it next to. Sure. How many pieces, we, like I said, 0.5% of the parcels, but it's 17, almost 20, 1/5 of the land in Oconee County. So we are talking a significant amount of land, and then would that burden people that live next to that for them to sell and make a profit on their land and get back to private property rights? So, obviously there's a balance somewhere, but I keep coming back to this, 17% or a good portion of land in Oconee County, 1/5 of it is agricultural. So I think we probably need to see a map.
Sure.
Next meeting, in my opinion, and, see the areas we're talking to and keep discussing it, but obviously we're not gonna fix anything tonight. That's my.
Yeah, I think there's certainly a problem between the two, whether it's the farmer that's giving up land or the person that moves in next to them. But I think you bring up a point. I don't know that all this property is zoned agriculture. Do we have a definition for agricultural lands in the county already that we would be basing this off of, or?
So if I may, in my head, we could only do it off of zone pieces of property. You couldn't just say it's control-free district. And I think, I know the tax assessors has a different definition, and that's based upon a monetary unit. But of these parcels, there's only, I know it's a huge amount of land, but they're surrounded by other farmland. Obviously, they're not just like bits and pieces out there, and most of it's in the south part of the county. But there's only about 600 or 700 parcels that surround those areas, and they average about 18 acres. I kind of did some, I didn't make a map for tonight. I just wanted you all to have something to talk about versus have something that, out there. So I'll provide a map next time. Also, you all had said, and almost all of you have said at various points, that can't we just tell someone that they're moving in next to a farm? So I'm going to put you on the spot, Mr. Johnson. And Mr. Vassy brought up earlier about the lead paint.
Just a disclosure.
A disclosure. How difficult do you think it would be for the realtors if you were gonna, wearing your realtor hat, to say, okay, you're moving in next to a chicken farm, here's your disclosure form, your form, you're moving in next to that kind of thing?
I can tell you that South Carolina, from a real estate perspective, is kind of the wild, wild west, in that being licensed in multiple states, many states do things where disclosures are an everyday occurrence, and in South Carolina, it's just kind of a free-for-all. I've seen states where you disclose every airport, the flight pattern of the planes that are flying over, where the nearest asphalt plant is, how often the wind blows in a certain direction, and things like that. To say that there's a disclosure around farms, again, that would go back to a state level ruling or a lawsuit.
And after hearing some of their statements, I don't know that that actually solves the problem.
Oh, no, it was just a
It's just
additional.
just so you know kind of thing, as opposed to,
But he may still build the house right on the
yeah,
road.
they can still do whatever they
Right.
wanted to with it, so.
Here are a couple of thoughts, though. I think that this is something worthy of the Planning Commission looking into more. I also think that the Agriculture Board needs to come back with something. At the same time, I have an issue with, if we were relating it to an urban area, hey, my parking lot and driveway's full, I'm gonna go park over in your grass. Right now, if you run a commercial farm, you know that there's certain setbacks, and they should exist from your property line in as a part of doing that business. Because otherwise, we're saying in an urban setting, my driveway's full, I can't park any more cars on it, so I'm gonna park my boat over on your grass. That setback is part of the cost of doing business. And so when we start saying somebody else is therefore penalized because I need your property for my setback, I think that we're taking advantage of somebody else's land that just hasn't done anything with their land as of yet. We talk about developers, and I don't disagree. We should have things that say there's so much green space that's needed, and sure, put that green space along that strip. But when we talk about subdivision, literally one stripe down the path creates a subdivision of property, and that's not a developer, or just one extra house now creates this problem. And I think that this is a bigger problem than our ordinance necessarily. So I think it's worthy of us talking about and taking on. I'm definitely a fan of protecting the existing farmland, and I am a huge proponent. You'll hear me say all the time, if you want things to stay the way they are, we've got a plan to make that happen. So I'm a big fan of that. At the same time, I would love to see us work together and not simply to say, I need your land for my setback, and that be an okay solution.
I don't think, I'm gonna be honest, I don't think that we are saying we are using their land for our setback. The farmers have honored their setbacks. We are simply saying that in the interest of the future, other people need to have a setback that ensures not lowering the farmer's use of his land or increasing what they're taking away from him with additional setbacks.
So like a lake overlay buffer, if you are zoned ag, then you're suggesting that there be a buffer around the ag as if it is a lake or something of that nature.
Perhaps. I've never thought of that as an overlay because it's more partial by partial, I think. I'm simply saying, and I think there's enough ag that is dispersed throughout the county in smaller pieces that also needs to be protected, because a farm with only 15 acres, if it's organic, and they build a subdivision on two sides of it, and suddenly everybody's spraying for centipede mites and rutabaga bugs, that guy's done for. He is out of business. I don't care how much he spent on organic inspections. I don't care how much he's paid in permitting fees. He's done.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I don't think that anybody has the right to take away someone's business because they don't want bugs under their leaves, when in fact, perhaps a simple planning in advance would have protected that farmer.
I think it's a worthy discussion.
So, if perhaps if you can come up with a map and the Ag Advisory Board can come up with some examples, maybe, of,
I could provide existing legislation that exists in other places. We're not creating the wheel. This exists in other states and other areas of New England, the breadbasket states, things of that nature. I can certainly bring you examples of them. That'd be fine. So I'll bring some maps, I'll talk to the Ag Board, and I'll bring some example legislation.
the farmers may know some.
Mr. Root,
Family farms
are we
that
going down a
would be
path
impacted.
that we're gonna get in trouble? I mean, instead of going through this for 3 or 4 meetings and then somebody coming in and saying,
It's a
is
dicey
illegal.
issue.
I'm sorry?
It's a dicey issue anytime you cut new ground, but it's something that can be done, tailored. I don't have a concern about heightened litigation under the scenario Mr. Johnson first pointed out, but there certainly could be some other scenarios. But it really, it depends on how it's drafted, and I've not looked at the legislation. It's not a South Carolina thing. I know out in California, and like Adam said, in some of the bigger areas, breadbasket areas, they have this kind of legislation on the books. So we're not reinventing the wheel, but we're putting a new wheel in South Carolina. So yeah, I mean, it's going to be tricky, but that's not to say it can't be done. It's just going to have to be something that's done carefully, drafted carefully, thought through carefully. But we have a lot of stakeholders who are involved, so that can.
Is this something that we can ask the Ag Advisory Board to come back to us with more definitive detail rather than us start from ground zero, that they start working with their tools to bring something to us?
I think that's what.
We certainly can. My only thought on that is, whereas this planning commission is balanced. There's farmers on here, there's future farmers on here, there's pro, anti here. The Ag Board is, I mean, in my head, you're going to get to 1,000 feet. I mean, that's what's going to come at you. Like, that's going to be the minimum here. And so, of course, the Ag Board, I'm not going to speak for them, but the chairman's here and the other Ag Board members are here. I'm sure they'd be happy to look at it. It's just, it's going to come.
I would
probably a little
think
heady.
that if they really wanted something serious to happen, that they would come to it with a legitimate, this is a good balance across the board. We have to achieve that balance, and we can't pass anything without achieving a balance of personal property rights for everybody.
At least when they bring something, it would give us a starting point. Whether we agree with what they bring us or not, we can always say, well, no, I don't agree with 1,000, we only want 500, or we only want whatever. It'll give us a starting point of what they actually think they need to protect their business, to protect the agriculture. But like Mike said, we also have the duty, on the other hand, to protect the non-agricultural people that may never grow. Well, some of them can't even grow flowers. So we got to protect those as well. So that's we'll fair. Get both sides on it. So that'll help us out to get a starting point.
And nothing from California.
No, sir. No, sir. They're currently seceding from the union, so they're good.
Mr. Gramley, do you have anything?
All right. If a farmer builds a chicken houses 400 feet from his property line, but he has to have 1,000-foot setback from the nearest house, that means he's requiring 600 feet of somebody else's property to be unusable for residential.
No. The farmer has to move his chicken house 600 more feet into his own property.
But yes,
In
in
order
order
to
not,
build his-
not to
his
have to
house.
make any changes, the farmer would need that person to move, right?
Well, okay.
So
let-
if
all
the
right,
farmer
here we go.
didn't want to make any changes whatsoever,
Here's a
then
piece
the
of
neighboring
property.
property would have to be.
And when the farmer, okay, there was a house over here, okay? When the farmer built his chicken houses, he set his chicken houses 400 feet off of that property line and 400 feet off of that property line. Okay? Had there been a house sitting here, he would have had to have set it 1,000 feet from that house.
1,000 feet from the
Okay,
house.
1,000 and 400 feet from this other property line. Well, the 1,000 feet's gonna include the 400 feet, so that 1,000 feet from the house is fine. However, if he decides that he wants to build, let's say that now someone comes in here and puts 4 or 5 houses across this line. Now suddenly he has to go 1,000 feet back here as well, which in this case would disallow him from any expansion. Period.
Well,
But it wouldn't cease, he couldn't stop operating the existing chicken house.
No, he could continue to
Okay.
operate those chicken houses, but
Just
it,
can't
when
build
the,
a new one.
when those
Okay.
houses need to be repaired or become,
So
have to be.
based on
they
that
can't.
scenario, it's not necessarily that you need 1,000-foot buffer. You need 600-foot buffer because you already got the 400 that you're already having to meet
Exactly,
anyway.
exactly.
That's where I'm
From the
talking about a
house.
balance, if I understood that math correct.
I'm not a farmer.
And then just on a historical thing, if I could, the thing that we just addressed to amend, and I was part of the council when that, of the commission when that was the Fair Play overlay was drafted. Part of the problem with that was there was like 12 people in the community who represented Fair Play, and a number of us who lived quite close. We lived within 4 miles. We were told we were not welcome at those planning meetings. So I think probably part of the issues with that ordinance is the fact that perhaps there was not enough community input. So I think if we reach out to the farmers and the Ag Commission reaches out to the folks and Mr. Chapman does some research on the legalities of it, I think we can reach a happy medium, certainly with protecting the farmland.
well, back to what I was getting at, if you build a chicken house within 400 feet of the property line, but it's 1,000 feet from the nearest residence, and then on that 600 feet, if somebody builds another house over there, do you then have to move your chicken house?
Well, that 600 feet belongs to the
Big grandfa-
farmer. That 600 feet belongs to the farmer, so he's not gonna put any.
No,
Well, I think,
saying you can build within 1,000 feet, within 400 feet of your property line, but it has to be 600 feet from the nearest residence.
Once,
Well, we're talking about on someone else's property.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
once the chicken
It has
houses
to be
are there.
1,000 feet from anyone else's house.
they can't build a new chicken house.
But
He can't build anything else.
the
except he-
residence within that 600 feet, which is off of the farmer's property now, he's not got 1,000 feet. Does he have to move to chicken houses, or is he
No, he-
grandfathered in?
No, nobody, that's not on this, they're not gonna build a house on his property.
No,
No, but he doesn't have to move
he doesn't
those.
own but the 400 feet. Somebody else owns the
No,
other 600
no, sir,
feet.
He's going through the same thing you showed me.
Okay, all right, okay, I got you.
We're,
The question
we're
is,
on two
is the
different levels.
existing chicken house grandfathered in? And I
Yeah.
would think
Yes,
yes.
the
But he
existing,
couldn't
I got
build
you,
a
okay.
new one.
You're talking about from
New
this
one,
house
Somebody
way
yeah.
built
over
a
here.
closer house.
The new
If
one
somebody
would be
comes
based
in
on
over
the new
here,
property.
then the new one, the new setbacks would be based on this new
If he wanted
house.
to build a new house or renovate the existing house, or no?
No, I think you can renovate, I think you can upgrade and that not be within the same footprint, right. But
Okay,
again, I think more information and time to think about it's a good
Yep.
thing.
Okay, I can see we're not gonna make any major decisions, so let's get Adam to get all the information. And I don't expect the agricultural committee to come up with anything right away, so
I don't know that we should address it until they
if,
come up with.
if they can come up with something,
Sure.
just, I mean, even if it's just something written, that we can discuss a little further into,
Certainly.
we'll put it back on the next agenda. If not, we'll wait till the next meeting.
Yes, sir.
So unless anyone has anything further, we will go. Anybody got any old business? Any new business? Do I hear those famous words?
As we adjourn.
All in favor, say aye. Aye. Okay.
That's such a hard